In this video, I'll walk you end to end between lectures and exams throughout the psychology of a pipeline-based studying. But what is really a pipeline for studying? Well, whether you're doing best or your worst, by the end of this video, you will be provided with a full strategical system that takes you from lectures to exams, and all the time it makes you hyper efficient and more prepared for the full contents in a more productive and more happier way that aligns with your goals and your emotional state. Let's dive deep. So, before introducing to the system, we will need to focus on some aspect of brain and psychological processes and why it's important to how you connect information and how you perceive and retrieve things. Initially, let's say this is Bob. Okay, Bob focuses a lot on input. He watches a lot of lectures, he goes to see content, he goes to YouTube, he does a lot of different things. No doubt, he studies so hard. And at the same time, he has to give output. What are the outputs? Exams, worksheets. But he does some sort of practice and some sort of homework. And in more theoretical cases, he just memorizes things. But what happens is that Bob focuses 70 to 80% of his energy in input and only 20% in his output. That is the main issue here. We're ingesting so much information, but we're not really testing in a way where we know that if we really know the information or not, and how we can perceive and retrieve in the examination. And hence he is input trained and not output oriented, and that's the biggest pain point that we have among most of the people. Like, say this, the brain is not aligned with proper memory retrieval. Okay, you memorize a lot of things, that's good, but your brain sometimes cannot retrieve properly the thing that you memorized or learned. You may be feeling confident, you may know all the maths, but your brain may lack some ability to do complex processing of things. Okay, and I think what happens is that your brain somewhat seeps through short-term versions of like contents that you see. What is happening here? Memory or content? Okay, memory or chapters or content, whatever it is, your brain takes it as in a short-term memory. It's like a little information box. Okay, and it has the most like vulnerability to not retrieve it later down the road because it hasn't gone to your long-term memory. And that's a problem, and that problem can be easily fixed with a strategical fix. I'll show you throughout this video. And what happens inside is that here's like what you can basically do. Here's the proper strategy. Let's say you're studying. Okay, you have these small memory notes. Whenever you're studying, let's say it's a big lecture, okay, and throughout you have some certain key or important points, you kind of explicitly say to your brain, cell number 1, or be like something method, etc., something formula, and then something formula exists, a formula within itself. This is a small thing that you memorize. This thing is called a schema for your brain. The schema has a heading and contents. Okay, now when you're memorizing it consciously, this gets sent to your brain as a short schema in your brain. Okay, and it goes to your brain where? In the, yes, you guessed it, in the short-term memory. Okay, now your brain stores it in the short-term memory. This is the problem here. Going to the short-term memory initially is okay. It stores somewhere something called at hippocampus, okay, in your brain. But here's the catch. Hippocampus forms certain indexes that allow your brain to connect between parts that commemorate this information. If this information is relatable slash you link it to something, it'll be easier for you to keep in touch. Easier to keep in touch. Now, what happened is that you took information and put in your short-term memory. Now, how can you take it into long-term? Let's say you sleep and revise. What's happening is that single little schemas, many schemas, are getting transferred to your cortex or your long-term memory slash long-term memory. And that happens throughout this psychological process, sleep and revise. What happens when you revise? When you revise, your brain takes that small thing from your short-term memory, takes this small schema and pulls it in present. Okay, pulls in present. Now, when you're doing it repetitively, your brain is getting a signal that, ooh, it's important. Now it's strengthening its connections. And when you repetitively sleep and revise, what happens is that your short-term memory eventually moves to long-term memory, and that is a fundamental thing that was needed to be understood. Now you understand schemas, content retrieval, and the link between short-term and long-term memory in your brain. Okay, now let's just go on to understanding the full pipeline in a nutshell. Okay, first of all, the pipeline pre-lecture, the first stage. There's only 3 simple stages from the pipeline. Pre-lecture, we're following a framework called SQRRR. Very easy to remember. Okay, the pre-lecture, like before the lecture, we do something called S and Q, only S and Q. Okay, and that's survey and questions. To form those initial schemas, as I was talking about, you have a very light schema in your brain just before the lecture, like some information boxes, empty boxes. Like, let's say if you see your lecture note that you know, or the chapter or the content, and ask some questions in your head. You don't even need to write or highlight. You could do that and scheme through the papers and be critical. Your brain will form schemas which will create those information boxes that will need to be filled. Your brain will create curiosity loops and try to find meanings and connections to prior schemas. New schemas, we have new schemas. Your brain will try to form links with old schemas, which is very important. And then when you go to the next class in lecture, those schemas get filled. Just before lecture, you can do just 2 things. You can survey it and question the materials. That forms those schemas and makes you more easier to grasp information in a long-term process in a more meaningful and sensible way. Okay, now the second part of the pipeline, and that is in lecture, which is we're focusing on RR, which is read and record. Okay, you sleep, very important, and the next day when you go to lecture, you read and record. Read and record the same lecture thing and take notes as the professor or the teacher is saying. What's now happening is that the initial curiosity and the slight context that you were in, you are more focused automatically throughout the lecture, and your brain easily forms those schemas, and the schemas, the curiosity gaps are fulfilled, that just snap in your brain. And long-term strength comes from giving more space during exams to compute in the short-term memory. And how does that happen? When you have too many schemas in your long-term memory, your brain can easily retrieve those and work against those. You don't need to put a lot of pressure on your short-term memory just before the exam day, and that's how you get more processing power throughout the exam time. If you have more short-term memory left and just let your long-term memory retrieve those things and easily compute many different things together. That makes sense. And one key thing that I would like to say you is that this practice of read and record and helping your schemas is actually enhancing your output capability. As I was talking about Bob, that Bob is focused a lot on input but not output. Now Bob is actually focusing a lot on output. He's getting to think in a way where he knows that the brain works in a certain way and I need to output those certain materials because I know how the brain works. And one big thing that I want to tell is that Google Calendar is a thing that you must use. When you're in class, you know that you're almost at the end of the class and everything. What you can do is go to Google Calendar and make a time block. That's the most productive hack. I can say you why. And in that time block, you add 2 to 3 lines of description, like literally to-do lists inside the time block. Instead of a generic time block, like a to-do list, literally write out what you are exactly gonna do in that time block. For example, for the next time, you could schedule your stage 1 of the pipeline, which is pre-lecture for the next class, and the post-lecture, which is also like a review which I'll go through. You can also schedule that. If you schedule it every time, you will not miss the pipeline. And this pipeline is very easily attainable if you just follow Google Calendar and just schedule it throughout your studying at one single time. And that all makes sense. Now comes to the third part of the pipeline, and that is post-lecture. That is also RR, and that is recite, review. Simple. Based on your calendar, you start studying. You first go back to and for each study block, first you recite and review this lecture, and for the next class you can easily just do your SQ, which is survey and questioning, for the next lecture. When you recite and review, it reinforces your brain schemas and helps you build those long-term memory, allows your neurons to more expand it, maximizing output. Our one goal is to maximize output the best way possible. And again, revise, scheme again. Always revise, iterate, read, revise, iterate, read. This is the process of insightful studying. In future, what you can also do is that take a diagnostic test of like a past paper way ahead and see what you are weak at and start preparing on that early. We have the full system now, okay? This is the full pipeline. SQRR, survey, questions, read, recite, review, okay? Post lecture, in lecture, and pre-lecture. You move like this, okay? And that is very phenomenal, easy to achieve. SQRRRR, and just Google Calendar and focusing on output, not fully on input. Our goal is to output information in the most efficient way possible. Again, reviewing the energy distribution, you should ideally focus only 30 to 40% of input and 70% of output, because output is the main thing. The node pipeline, first, second, third, you can just add like a node. Oh, your node is in the first pipeline, and the second pipeline, and the third pipeline. Just make it simple, man, okay? And your brain from those schemas, you turn those into short-term memory, and then you sleep plus review, strengthen those schemas, it goes to long-term memory, and you can easily retrieve those during exams. And diagnostics tests help you know where your weaknesses are. And also use Google Calendar to use specific descriptions of what tasks you are gonna do for this pipeline and the next pipeline for the two nodes. Like for example, a lecture is coming up and you may want to revise for that lecture, and you may want to revise this present lecture that is going on now. And this is, my friend, the full system as promised. See you guys in the next video. Bye bye.